The word on the street is that America's in the middle of a major shakeup. Your social media feeds are probably blowing up with friends bailing on those ridiculously expensive cities, and cousins are putting down roots in places you used to just fly over on your way somewhere else. From 2019 to 2025, the map of where people actually lived and where they wanted to live went through some serious changes and then changed again just for good measure. The pandemic basically kicked the door wide open for remote work. Supply chains got all twisted up like a pretzel and then eventually untangled themselves. Builders were scrambling to keep up with the demand, and then they slammed on the brakes. Some states were absolutely bursting at the seams with new residents, while others were bleeding people left and right. Tonight, we're gonna try to make some sense out of this massive reshuffling of the deck, and we're going to do it without any of the hype or those cheesy, overused slogans. Just the straight-up economics, the real social stuff that matters, and the housing numbers that you can actually use to make an informed decision about your own life. We're going to look at all of this through 3 different lenses. First, the economic lens, which means we'll be keeping a close eye on jobs, wages, and the types of work that tend to keep people tied to a specific place. Then, the social lens, which focuses on migration patterns, age demographics, and how families make decisions about things like schools, safety, and childcare. And finally, the housing lens, which will follow rents, the number of houses that are actually up for sale, and the real, all-in monthly costs that ultimately decide whether a move is going to stick for the long haul. We'll start with where things stood before the pandemic even hit, then move on to the big remote work explosion, and finally, the cooling off period we saw from 2023 to 2025. And we'll wrap the whole thing up with a practical guide to help you pick a place that's actually right for you. Way back in 2019, the story of where people were moving in America was pretty much what you'd expect. The big coastal hubs and those superstar metro areas were still pulling in grads and specialists like crazy. Meanwhile, the Sun Belt metros were offering bigger houses, shorter commutes, a huge selling point, and a lower overall cost of living. The South was already attracting more people from other parts of the country than it was losing, and the West's growth was starting to shift towards the more affordable inland markets, instead of those ridiculously expensive coastal areas that only the super rich could afford. The pattern was pretty consistent. People were either willing to pay a premium to be in those areas with tons of high-paying jobs, or they were trading that for more space and some serious savings in places where you had to drive everywhere instead of hopping on the subway. Then, bam, 2020 came along and turned everything completely upside down. Remote work, even if it was just for part of the week, completely broke the connection between your desk and that downtown office. Young adults who had been crammed into tiny apartments, with roommates hightailed it back home to their parents, and then they started forming their own households again in 2021. That one decision one household suddenly becoming two created a massive spike in demand for rental properties. Asking rents went through the roof, especially in places where the number of new people moving in was outpacing the number of new apartments that were actually being built. The South absorbed the biggest influx of people in the shortest amount of time. Between July 2020 and July 2024, the U.S. Census region known as the South gained millions of people from other regions of the country. Demographers summed it up in pretty blunt terms: the U.S. moved south. During that initial surge, some private companies were the first to pick up on what was happening. Migration reports based on online searches and truck rental numbers were pointing to Florida, Texas, and the Carolinas as the big winners. Data from moving companies like United Van Lines and Unigroup and one-way truck rentals like U-Haul painted a similar picture, even if their exact rankings were slightly different. People were ditching those outrageously expensive coastal metro areas and settling down all across the Southeast and the Mountain West. By late 2022, interest rates started to creep up. Builders were struggling with higher costs for materials and labor, and rent increases cooled off from red hot. You gotta grab it now to just warm, maybe take a look. The South was still gaining people overall, but the flood had slowed down to more of a manageable, steady stream. State-to-state flow tables from the Census Bureau really captured the heart of the story. Big states on the east and west coasts were still losing residents to the south, but the inflows were becoming more diverse, and some metro areas saw their inflows start to level off as affordability became a real concern. A major change was that the list of desirable destinations was expanding. During the peak of the frenzy, a lot of people were just grabbing the first okay, that'll do option they could find. But as the market started to normalize a bit, they became much more selective and choosy. They were swapping a general Sun Belt state for a very specific area with the right commute time, the right school district for the kids, and a rent payment that they could actually afford without living on ramen noodles. That's when you started hearing stories like, "We left Phoenix for Tulsa," or "We moved from Brooklyn to upstate New York, and then eventually to Raleigh." And all those moves boiled down to the same basic math: total monthly cost, and the amount of time spent getting to and from work or school. By 2024, things had pretty much leveled out. Texas and Florida were still gaining residents, but at a significantly slower pace than during the peak of the pandemic. Analysts were specifically pointing out this slowdown and scratching their heads about it. Truck-based indexes echoed this shift. South Carolina topped U-Haul's 2020 for growth ranking, with Texas slipping from its long-held #1 spot, while California was stuck at the bottom again for net one-way move-ins. If you dig a little deeper, you can see the underlying reason why all this was happening: affordability, plain and simple. Even in Florida, where the inbound momentum had seemed completely unstoppable, local inflows into metro areas like Tampa Bay fell off a cliff in 2024 as housing and living costs went through the roof. They plummeted from roughly 35,000 to around 10,000 net arrivals year over year, which was the biggest slowdown among all the large U.S. metro areas in that particular analysis. Meanwhile, the Census Bureau's July to July estimates for 2024 showed Texas, North Carolina, and South Carolina at the very top for net domestic gain, and California, New York, and Illinois bringing up the rear at the bottom of the list. This basically confirmed the overall trend, even though the pace of growth was definitely cooling off. The real lesson here isn't that the South suddenly stopped being a popular destination. It's that price and the available supply of housing are now dictating just how much the South wins, and which specific submarkets within each state are going to capture the next big wave of growth. If you're seriously thinking about making a move, all this data can feel incredibly overwhelming. It's easy to get lost in the weeds and just throw your hands up in frustration. So, here's a quick guide on how to make sense of it all, so it actually helps you instead of just confusing you even more. First, know where the data is actually coming from. Census state-to-state flows measure actual, verified changes in residents over the course of a year. They're a little slow to come out, but they cover absolutely everyone. Moving company studies like the ones from United Van Lines and Unigroup measure moves made by their customers. These give you a pretty good sense of direction, but they're not a complete, comprehensive count of every single move. Truck rental data think U-Haul measures one-way rentals. This is a more real-time indicator of what's happening, but it definitely has its own built-in biases. Real estate platforms like Redfin track searches and pending moves, which is awesome for getting an early sense of which way the wind is blowing, but not so great for getting final, hard numbers. Use all of these different sources together, and the overall picture will start to come into sharper focus. Second, pay close attention to net domestic migration by state each July to July. This tells you exactly who's gaining households and who's losing them right now. In 2024, the top gainers were Texas, North Carolina, and South Carolina. The biggest losers were California, New York, and Illinois basically. The same pattern you're probably seeing all over your social media feeds. Third, overlay affordability and what's actually being built in the area. Red-hot inflows of new residents often cool off pretty quickly when asking rents, and mortgage payments start to climb faster than local wages can keep up. Metro areas with a lot of new construction being completed in that 2023 to 2025 timeframe saw slower rent growth and offered more incentives to attract renters, which kept them appealing even when interest rates were stubbornly high. That's why you probably heard about people getting a month free in places that looked crazy expensive on paper. People move for three primary reasons, and they all build on each other: money, time, and meaning. Money is all about your monthly expenses, rent or mortgage payments, utilities, insurance, property taxes if you own, and transportation costs. Time is your daily commute and the time it takes to get the kids to school or daycare. Meaning is your family, your close-knit community, your sense of purpose and belonging, the underlying reason you decide to stick around, even after that initial excitement of moving to a new place starts to fade. From 2019 to 2025, money was the big driver behind that first wave of moves. People were either trying to escape sky-high fixed costs or trying to find more space for their families to spread out. Time and meaning are what ultimately decided whether that second move happened, whether people decided to stay put, or whether they moved again to shorten their commute or find a community that was a better fit for them. That's precisely why some of the people who moved during the pandemic ended up doing a move. After the move, that first move was all about the price tag. The second move was about finding the right place to call home. When it comes to jobs and opportunities, there are really two very different Americas. One is the high-skill cluster where wages are high enough to give you options, even if prices are also high. The other is the broad middle class, where wages have to stretch a whole lot further to make ends meet. Net migration tends to follow that second group. It flows toward metro areas that allow you to convert median wages into median housing costs, with some money left over at the end of the month to actually save for the future. Each of these mini portraits uses real trends that we saw from 2019 to 2025 to show you what's really happening beneath the surface of the map. Case File A, from coastal high cost to Carolinas, compromise the pattern. Dual-income renters decide to bail on a coastal city when their rent hits 35 to 45% of their gross income. They land in North Carolina or South Carolina, where a $1,900 rent payment can still get them a relatively new building, assigned parking, and a manageable 20 to 35-minute commute to work. Net domestic migration data confirms that the Carolinas were big gainers in 2024, and moving indexes consistently put both states near the top for inbound momentum. The winner isn't necessarily the absolute cheapest city, it's the metro area that manages to keep your total monthly housing cost under 30% of your gross income, and your daily commute under 45 minutes each way. Case File B, Florida rocket. Florida break in 2021 to 2023. Florida's gains were completely off the charts, numbers that nobody had ever seen before. By 2024, the brake lights were flashing in several metro areas as affordability became a significant issue. Tampa Bay's slowdown in net arrivals served as a clear example of this phenomenon. The state was still drawing plenty of newcomers, but the rate of growth was definitely slowing down. Lesson: hot markets cool off, period. It's inevitable when costs start climbing faster than wages can keep up. If you're dead set on moving to Florida, target submarkets with more new construction or better incentives for renters and buyers. The goal isn't just to say you live in Florida. It's to find a specific address in Florida that makes solid financial sense for your individual situation. Case File C. Texas tilt without the stampede. Texas remained a top gainer in 2024, but the massive surge of people had definitely slowed down from the pandemic highs as prices rose, and potential buyers were facing increasingly higher mortgage rates. Truck and mover studies still showed a strong inbound share, but it wasn't the same absolute frenzy that we saw back in 2021. Lesson: The decision to move to Texas is now highly dependent on the specific location you choose. Dallas-Fort Worth, with its huge supply of available housing, isn't the same as the centrally located neighborhoods of Austin. Look for detailed maps that show where new construction is being completed in 2023 to 2025. And be sure to take full advantage of any incentives that are being offered in those areas. Case File D, California outflow. California anchors. California ranked dead last again for net U-Haul move-ins in 2024. Another clear sign of people moving out of the state. While census numbers showed negative net domestic migration, however, those metro anchors are still managing to retain high-skill clusters, and international inflows and births are helping to offset some of that overall population loss. Lesson: statewide headlines can often mask what's actually happening in specific neighborhoods. If your wage puts you in the top 25% of the Bay Area or LA market, the cost-to-opportunity ratio can still be worth it for you. If not, it might be worth exploring inland California or some neighboring states and calculating your full monthly cost of living to see what makes the most sense. Case File E, the move after the move. Someone who moved from New York to an overheated Sun Belt metro area back in 2021 decides to relocate again in 2024, this time to a more reasonably priced metro, with a larger supply of new apartments being built in 2023 to 2025 and lower effective rent. That second move is all about aligning cost with their day-to-day life, not just with the total square footage of their living space. Lesson: if your first move solved your space problem but made your daily commute significantly worse, make that second move all about getting your time back. This is the section that could potentially save you some serious money. Step 1. Set your guardrail. Strictly cap your housing costs at 30% of your gross income. If you're carrying a significant amount of debt, aim for 25 to 28%. On $60,000 a year, that works out to around $1,000 to $150, $1,500 a month. Treat this as a hard limit that you absolutely cannot exceed. Step 2. Use the right migration signals at the right time. Are you planning your move a year out? Use census net domestic migration data to identify which states have strong momentum. Planning 3 to 6 months out? Add moving company and truck studies to get a better sense of the overall direction. Picking neighborhoods this month? Scour reports from real estate platforms to see where people are searching now and which metro areas are showing signs of weakening demand. Step 3. Overlay affordability. Then supply. Affordability without an adequate supply of housing is nothing but an illusion. Prioritize metro areas that are seeing a lot of new apartments being completed in that 2023 to 2025 timeframe. That's where you're most likely to find the best incentives and deals. Slower inbound migration in some Sun Belt metros in 2024 to 2025 is a clear signal that you have some bargaining power to negotiate a better deal. Step 4. Negotiate the effective number. A 1-month free deal on a 12-month lease effectively cuts your rent by about 8%. Ask for 2 things at once: a small reduction in the base rent and an additional incentive on top of that. Landlords often prefer that to simply cutting the sticker price of the rent. Step 5. Price the full stack. Don't just look at the base rent or mortgage payment. Factor in everything: utilities, insurance, property taxes if you own, parking fees, and internet service. A seemingly cheap base rent with a $180 electric bill in the summer isn't really that cheap. Your ultimate decision should always be based on the total cost of living. Step 6. Time your move. Late fall and winter are typically slower than the peak summer months, so you'll likely find better deals. Starting your lease in the middle of the month can sometimes give you an edge if you can afford to have to places for a couple of weeks in order to snag a better deal. The resulting savings can often more than pay for that overlap. Step 7. Decide with your commute in mind. A 20-minute commute each way works out to about 3 hours a week. A 55-minute commute each way adds up to about 9 hours a week. That difference is time that you could be spending on exercise, learning a new language, spending quality time with your kids before bedtime, or even working on a profitable side hustle. Time is a valuable part of your overall cost of living. This is how regions can transform migration into a lasting, thriving community, and not just a fleeting news headline. Permit the missing middle duplexes, fourplexes, and small walk-up apartments located near job centers. Allow working families to live close to where they work. This helps stabilize schools and supports local small businesses. Phase supply with infrastructure when a large amount of new housing is completed all at once. Rents can fluctuate wildly and create instability. Stagger the delivery of new housing units and link them directly to transit options, accessible clinics, and conveniently located grocery stores. Tie incentives to outcomes if a development project receives tax breaks or other incentives. Require a certain percentage of the units to have clearly defined rent caps or renewal bans for reliable tenants. Transparency builds trust and prevents resentment. Lower the true cost of shelter weatherization grants, efficient HVAC systems, and energy-efficient window upgrades can all significantly cut monthly utility bills without directly subsidizing rent. In a world where interest rates are stubbornly high, these initiatives matter far more than catchy slogans. Publish renewal dashboards show the ranges of quarterly rent increases by zip code. This reduces rumors and speculation and allows families to plan their finances more effectively. People are far more likely to accept numbers that they can actually see and verify. Myth 1. Everyone is moving to the South forever. Reality. The overall trend still favors the South, but the pace of growth depends heavily on affordability. Inflows into Florida and Texas slowed down noticeably in 2024, while the Carolinas rose in relative rank. Pay close attention to housing costs and what's actually being built in the area, not just the trends from last year. Myth 2. California and New York are emptying out completely. Reality. Both states experienced negative net domestic migration in 2024. But international inflows and births offset some of that population loss, and those high-skill economic anchors remain firmly in place. Whether or not you should move depends largely on your specific occupation and earning potential. Myth 3. Mover and truck indexes are the absolute truth. Reality. They provide a quick snapshot of what's happening, but they're not a complete, comprehensive census of every single move. Use them to get a general sense of direction, but always confirm those trends with census flows and local rent data. Myth 4. If a metro area cooled off, it's a bad bet. Reality. Cooling off plus new supply actually equals negotiating power for you. That's the ideal time to make your move, provided that the schools and the commute fit your needs and lifestyle. From 2019 to 2025, America essentially tried out a new geography in real time, and the results were fascinating. The South gained the most people overall, but 2024 to 2025 clearly demonstrated that. Price puts a very real limit on that growth. The Carolinas' steady rise. Texas still strong, but slower inflow of new residents. Florida's metro-by-metro cool-off. And California, New York's continued domestic outflow aren't contradictions at all. They're all simply chapters in the same evolving story. The overarching lesson for households is simple. Don't chase a state based on headlines. Choose a specific area where your monthly expenses and your daily life actually work in harmony. Closing playbook. Print this out and stick it on your fridge as a handy reminder. 1. Guardrail. Cap your housing costs at 30% of your gross income. 25 to 28% if you have significant debt. 2. Signals. Start with census data for state momentum. Use moving, truck data for a quick snapshot. And finish with platform migration reports for neighborhood direction. 3. Supply. Prioritize metro areas with a lot of new construction being completed into 0-3 to 0-5, and visible incentives for renters and buyers. That's where you're most likely to come out on top. 4. Timing. Aim to start your lease in late fall or winter to get the best deals. Negotiate the effective rent, not just the sticker price that you see advertised. 5. Full cost. Price out your rent or mortgage payment, plus utilities, insurance, property taxes if applicable, parking, internet, and your daily commute. 6. Test life. Visit your potential new neighborhood at 8 a.m., noon, and 6 p.m. To get a feel for the area, introduce yourself to a neighbor. Do a quick grocery run. Try out your potential commute. 7. Decide for 3 years. Choose the address that will make your next 36 months better and more fulfilling, not just a zip code that sounds good or impressive. Between 2019 and 2025, Americans voted with their feet for more space, more time, and a set of numbers that simply made better sense for their lives. The South was the clear winner in terms of overall direction and growth. Affordability ultimately determined the speed at which that growth occurred. Now it's your turn to take action. Pick 3 areas that you're interested in. Calculate your full monthly cost of living in each one. Ask about available incentives for renters or buyers. Choose the commute that allows you to be yourself and recharge when you finally get home. At the end of the day, when the next migration headline comes out, you'll already be settled in and happy because you didn't blindly follow the hype. You followed the numbers. Sources used for the script include official state-to-state census flow tables and 2023 releases. Moving industry studies for 2024, U-Haul one-way truck indexes, and platform migration reports summarizing 2024 to 2025 slowdowns and shifting inflows. Together, they all tell the same compelling story. Strong Sun Belt inflows from 2020 to 2023, followed by a moderation in 2024 to 2025, with the Carolinas and Texas still remaining net positive. Florida cooling off in key metro areas, and California, New York, and Illinois posting the largest net domestic outflows.